The house in East Los Angeles was no longer a home. It was an emotional gas chamber where the oxygen of peace had been replaced by the suffocating tension of contempt. Vera knew that in minutes, the morning silence would be torn apart by the first humiliation of the day. She stirred the coffee in Joaquim's mug, the sound of the spoon against the porcelain echoing in the silence like a gunshot. The breakfast routine had become a daily tribunal. Vera's every act, Joaquim's every breath, was a reason for criticism and calculation. The couple, once Mexico's strength on American soil, was now nothing more than a nuisance. Joaquim, his heart broken and his memory wavering, felt the weight of his children's contempt as intensely as the pain in his chest. He tried to sip his coffee, but his blue eyes, filled with sadness, were fixed on the door, anticipating the entrance of his eldest daughter, Sandra, the judge of his misery. The audience feels the air thicken. The slow motion follows Sandra's silhouette emerging in the hallway, her expensive perfume contrasting with the rottenness of her intentions. She was no longer a daughter, she was a stray creditor, come to collect on a life debt that never existed. The creak of Sandra's dining room chair was like the harbinger of a thunderstorm. She entered, ignoring her parents, their rigid posture, and their expressionless face, sitting at the table without the ritual "good morning" or the slightest gesture of affection. The silence was so intense it screamed. Vera felt the familiar humiliation, the lump in her throat that made her swallow the tears before they could fall. She tried to argue, her voice low about Joaquim's need for peace, but Sandra didn't even look at her. Coldness was her language. The argument began, disguised as financial management, but was in fact a direct attack on their dignity. Sandra talked about the cost of medication, food expenses, and the money that was being wasted on the upkeep of two elderly people. Vera held Joaquim's hand under the table, a desperate gesture of someone trying to protect what remains of a love in the midst of a battlefield. She felt his hand tremble, her tired body giving in to the pressure of ingratitude. The height of cruelty came with a sudden, rehearsed movement. The sharp sound of sheets of paper hitting the wooden table interrupted the three's breath. Sandra, with a movement of revulsion, threw the stack of medical bills, statements, and invoices in front of her parents. His gaze was one of pure financial hatred, his voice filled with cold venom. "You are an unbearable burden on this family. These bills are crushing my future. You will find a solution, and it needs to be quick, because I will no longer bear your burden." The wooden floor beneath the Persian rug creaked, betraying Vera's presence before she could even move completely away from the office door. The murmur of her children's voices, previously muffled, became clear, sharp as shards of ice. Vera stopped, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs, feeling that their fate was being sealed inside. Roberto, the middle son, with his ever-calculating voice, talked about logistics and bureaucracy, using business jargon to mask his cruelty. He explained the cost-benefit of moving his parents into an institution, coldly comparing them to a rapidly depreciating asset. He suggested that the money from the sale of the house would be better invested in his children's future. Bruno, the youngest, always the most passive, hesitated, but was soon overwhelmed by Sandra's determination. "There's no other way, Bruno. Money is tight and their old age isn't our eternal responsibility," she retorted with impatient irritation. He gave in, as always, to the argument of convenience and selfishness that reigned between them. Little by little, Vera grasped the full extent of the conspiracy. They weren't discussing palliative care, they were mapping out a roadmap for exile. The nursing home wasn't a refuge, but a prison, a distant place where the parents' presence would no longer interfere with the luxurious, uncomplicated life their children desired. The plan was clear: convince Joaquim, whose reasoning was weakened, that it was for his own good, and drag Vera along, forcing her to accept the decision in the name of family harmony. They talked about selling the house, about the future that opened up for them without the burden of parental responsibility. "We have to be firm. Once they're there, it's final. No frequent visits, no bringing them home for Christmas, decreed Sandra, the plan's cold architect. They need to understand that this is the new reality, and there's no going back. Roberto nodded curtly, satisfied with the strategy's effectiveness. Vera felt her blood run cold. They talked about her and Joaquim as if they were old furniture to be discarded, without history, without soul, without the love that gave them life. The pain of betrayal was physical, a wound that opened in the center of her soul. She remembered all the sleepless nights when they were children. Her hand covered her mouth, stifling a sob that threatened to burst forth. She took a step back, and dizziness nearly made her fall. The world she thought was solidly built on the pillar of family crumbled to ash around her, revealing the rot of ingratitude. Sandra's voice, victorious and unapologetic, echoed through the hallway like a gavel striking the final verdict. Once the paperwork is signed, they will never come back to this house. They will never be a problem again. It was the sentence that destroyed the last thread of hope. Vera collapsed silently against the wall, tears streaming uncontrollably, the pain of rejection more bitter than death. The engine of the nursing home's white van rang out on the East Los Angeles street like a funeral bell. It was early, but the commotion attracted the attention of neighbors, who huddled at their windows, curious and silent. Vera watched the vehicle, feeling like her heart had turned into a block of ice, ready to be thrown away. The children came out onto the sidewalk, performing a farewell play. Sandra hugged her mother, forcing back tears that wouldn't come, murmuring hollow phrases about better care and needing rest to her parents. Roberto and Bruno carried the few suitcases, looking relieved, but with a mask of artificial sadness on their faces. The neighbors, with pity and confusion in their eyes, watched the spectacle of hypocrisy. They saw Joaquim's frailty, supported by Vera, being led to the van, and there was nothing in the scene that resembled an act of love or care. The lie was palpable in the air, thick and nauseating. Joaquim, his gaze lost, murmured an inaudible lament, his body surrendered to the betrayal he could barely process. Vera held him tightly, feeling that the only thing left between them was their union against the world, the last bastion of a decades-long love. As she passed Sandra, Vera stopped, her lacking strength resurfacing with the courage of indignation. Her eyes, which had been crying all night, were now dry and hard, fixed on her daughter with painful clarity. She was no longer crying, she was fighting. Vera's voice, low but penetrating, cut through Sandra's pretense like a steel blade. She didn't scream, but every syllable carried the weight of years of sacrifice and the pain of that final moment. Her daughter shuddered at the truth thrown in her face. "This is not care, Sandra. You know it, I know it, and God knows it," Vera declared, pointing to the white van that was waiting like a predator. "This is dumping. It's the cruelest way of telling us we're disposable." Sandra looked away, unable to bear her mother's truth. Vera turned, leaving her daughter with her newly planted guilt. She helped Joaquim into the van, sitting beside him and holding his hand with all her strength, as if his touch could protect them from the abyss that was opening up. She took one last look at the house that had been her home for 30 years, now a symbol of her defeat. The engine revved, carrying them away from the past. The hollow sound of the nursing home's iron gate closing behind them was the last sound of the freedom being stolen from them. The gate closed with a metallic clang, and then silence fell. A deathly silence that wasn't peace, but rather the sound of hope dying. The smell of strong disinfectant mixed with a slight acidity hung in the air of the nursing home hallway. An odor Vera quickly identified as the smell of abandonment. The place was clean, almost sterile, but devoid of life or color, like adipository of forgotten souls, carefully packed in their beds and wheelchairs. The room they were assigned was small and impersonal, with 2 single beds and a single window overlooking a high wall. There was no room for memories or affection. The absence of their own possessions, their photos, their history, made their stay cold and strange, a luxurious prison, if one could call it that. Joaquim, whose illness progressed with the rapidity of grief, began to wither. The lack of routine and the absence of morning sunlight from his own balcony affected him more than any illness. He refused to eat, hope fading from his blue eyes like the water of a dry river in summer. Vera tried to keep his spirits up, forcing herself to sing old Mexican songs, the ones that had sung during their courtship in Jalisco, but the melodies sounded hollow and distant. The weight of their children's ingratitude hung over them like a shroud, suffocating any attempt at joy. Along the hallways, Vera saw the same scene on different faces, elderly people who glanced at the door with every ring of the doorbell, waiting for visitors that never arrived, a phone that never rang. She saw silent tears on faces marked by time and the pain of rejection. They were living proof of what it means to be a burden. A woman sitting next to her in the garden with a sad smile confided, "My son visits me every 3 months. He says he's very busy. I know he just wants to check if I'm still breathing. There's no love here, 100, just the obligation." Vera felt the truth of these words like a punch. Joaquim's sadness was more than illness. It was surrender. He spent hours in silence, staring at the wall, a wall that symbolized the barrier erected by his own children. He felt trapped, humiliated, and without purpose in a place where he should only wait for the end. One night, as Vera watched over her restless sleep, Joaquim opened his eyes in the darkness. His voice, almost a hoarse whisper, tore at Vera's heart, filled with brutal hopelessness. He grabbed her hand, his touch feverish. "Be my life," he whispered with the last shred of dignity he had left. "I would rather die free on the side of the road than live one more second here, in this hell they call home." The phrase was a cry for freedom, a plan born in the darkness, a silent pact of escape and redemption. The early morning was cold and still, only the thin Los Angeles moon bearing witness to Vera and Joaquim's desperation. Dressed in the same clothes as the day before, they moved like shadows, driven by the urge to escape. The cold California night air was an invitation to freedom that they had to accept. Vera had hidden some cereal bars and a few dollar bills in her waistband, which would be their only sustenance on their uncertain journey. She guided Joaquim, whose steps were slow and unsteady, through the home's sleepy corridors. At each door, the sight of the other elderly sleeping gave them the strength to continue, fleeing in the name of all the abandoned. The alarm at the main gate was very sophisticated, so Vera remembered the old chain-link fence at the back near the dumpster. They squeezed through the small opening, feeling the cold wire scrape against their clothes, the sensation of physical pain, a welcome reminder that they were still alive. Once outside, the feeling of freedom was both intoxicating and terrifying. There was no plan, only the imperative to get as far away from this luxurious prison as possible. They walked hand in hand, down the dark sidewalk, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Joaquim coughed, his chest aching, but he refused to stop. He drew strength from Vera's silent determination, which seemed to have grown younger with her rebellious attitude. The dark road stretched ahead, a carpet of asphalt leading into the unknown. The dark road of a country highway became freedom and condemnation at the same time. With every mile, they moved further away from their children's betrayal, but closer to the danger of being alone, without money or shelter, in an unknown area of the vast California desert. They walked for hours, the early morning chill giving way to the dry heat that heralded dawn. Joaquim's energy, fueled by adrenaline, began to drain, his steps becoming more shuffling and unsteady. The sun rose over the horizon, painting the desert with hues of fire and gold. The sight of the rising sun's beauty, a reminder of the world his children had tried to take from him, was the last thing Joaquim saw before he collapsed. His body sagged, his grip weakened, and he fell to the hot, sandy roadside. The sun rose in the desert, But Joaquim did not have the strength to face it. His body weakened. He began to faint. The side of the road was his new and cruel home. The roar of an old engine and the rusty orange of a '79 Ford pickup truck shattered the silence of the desert, an unexpected glimpse of civilization amidst the vastness. The vehicle came to an abrupt stop just a few meters from where Vera was desperately trying to revive Joaquim. Time stood still. Was it the police? Was it a danger? A tall man with a suntanned face got out of the car. He wore a cap and work vest, and his eyes, despite their roughness, conveyed an instant kindness. He introduced himself as Marcos Ramirez, a Mexican-American gardener returning home from work in the neighboring town. Without asking any questions, Marcos quickly assessed the situation, realizing the seriousness of Joaquim's fainting. His approach was one of immediate action and humanity. He crouched down, checked Joaquim's pulse, and, with Vera's help, carefully lifted him into the back seat of his pickup truck. Marcos drove to the nearest hospital, constantly talking to Vera to keep her calm, telling light jokes and speaking softly in Spanish. He didn't ask about the escape, the children, or the nursing home. He simply treated Vera and Joaquim with the dignity they had been denied. In the emergency room, Marcos stayed by Vera's side throughout the wait, ignoring his wife's calls and the urgency of his own tasks. He translated medical terms, held Vera's hand, and offered the only comfort he could, his solid, unwavering presence. Tests revealed that Joaquim was severely dehydrated and had very low blood pressure, but he would stabilize. Vera's fear began to give way to overwhelming exhaustion. She looked at Marcos, this stranger who had risked his time and peace for them. Once Joaquim was asleep in a bed, Vera turned to Marcos, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude and confusion. She had to ask, had to understand the reason behind such kindness, a concept she thought had been banished from her life. "Marcos," she asked, her voice breaking, "why did you help us? Why risk everything for two strangers on the road?" He smiled, an open and sincere smile, with a discreet melancholy in his eyes, revealing the pure motivation behind his act. "You remind me of the grandparents I lost early. Your eyes have the same light and the same pain. I would do it all over again for you, Dona Vera." The hospital allowed Joaquim to be released the next day, provided he received supervision and rest. Marcos, true to his silent promise, was there to pick them up. He didn't suggest taking them to a hotel or shelter. He opened the doors of his own home, a small, modest house in the San Fernando Valley. The idea of a new home, even a temporary one, was a balm for wounded souls. When they arrived, a warm, smiling woman was waiting at the door, Ana Gutierrez, Marcos's wife. She was the embodiment of Latin energy, her soul as vibrant as the print on her dress. Ana ran to Vera, not with a formal handshake, but with a strong, long, and emotional hug. Ana hugged Vera as if she'd known her for years, as if she were the daughter she'd missed. She led her into the living room, offering her homemade soup that smelled of comfort and security. She prepared a room for them both with clean sheets and the scent of lavender, a sanctuary of peace after the chaos of their escape. Vera felt the ice wall around her heart begin to melt. In just a few hours, Marcos and Ana had done more for them than their own children had in years. They didn't see the couple as a burden or an expense, but as human beings worthy of care and love. The Ramirez's affection was genuine and uncomplicated. They laughed with Joaquim, which encouraged him to laugh too. They treated him with respect and included him in conversations, restoring a part of his dignity that illness and contempt had taken away. Ana sat with Vera on the porch in the afternoon sun and opened up about life, hard work, and the joy of building a family. She said, "You're safe now. Here. You're not a burden. You're family. We want you to stay as long as necessary." A new hope blossomed in Vera's heart, a seed of light planted in the soil of generosity. She realized that family wasn't just blood, but the choice to love and care. a bitter lesson her own children had taught her. Fate, however, had one more piece to move on the board. The sun was already setting when the sound of a motorcycle horn echoed down the street. The mailman approached the porch and handed Joaquim a heavy, official, and sealed envelope. The mailman delivered the envelope, and the red seal of a law firm in Guadalajara seemed to glow in the fading light, heralding the end of one era and the beginning of another. Joaquim, with trembling hands, opened the official envelope. The seal of Jalisco, Mexico, was unmistakable. Vera, Ana, and Marcos watched in suspense. The document was a legal notice written in formal Spanish, summoning Joaquim Cortez to appear at a law firm. The mystery on paper was denser than the suspense of any movie. Inside the envelope was a copy of the will of his father, Don Sebastian Cortez, a rancher from Jalisco, from whom Joaquim had become estranged years earlier after immigrating to the United States. Don Sebastian's name was synonymous with wealth and tradition in the Mexican state. Joaquim began reading the document aloud, his voice choked with emotion and disbelief. Don Sebastian, who had died 6 months earlier, had left his entire fortune and properties to his only son, Joaquim. The inheritance was colossal, 10 rural properties on prime farmland and a capital of 20 million Mexican pesos. The amount, even converted, was substantial, more than enough to ensure that Joaquim and Vera would never need any help. The news hit the room with the force of thunder, the irony of life cruelly revealed in that moment of vulnerability. But what shocked Vera and Joaquim was the lawyer's afterword, which mentioned the difficulty in tracking down Joaquim due to unanswered letters and withheld correspondence. The lawyer detailed attempts to contact him over the past 3 years, always directed to the Los Angeles address. Vera felt a cold lurch in the pit of her stomach. She remembered mailboxes full of trash, Sandra always rushing to get the mail. The truth hit her with a painful, cruel clarity. Her children knew, or at least suspected. They not only evicted them for being a financial burden, but they did so knowing that their parents were, in fact, heirs to a fortune. Their crime was not just abandonment. It was the appropriation and deliberate concealment of an inheritance. Vera clenched her fists, her pain turning into silent, resolute fury. Her children had been robbed of 3 years of dignity, peace, and security, and condemned to an asylum in the name of a lie. The betrayal was profound, immeasurable. She looked at Joaquim, whose face, despite his inheritance, expressed only the pain of disappointment and ingratitude of his children. They knew it. They hid the letters for years, Vera whispered, her voice filled with cold venom. They made us beggars while we were rich. They discarded us for greed. The new routine in Ana and Marcos's home was one of peace and care, an oasis. The news of the inheritance had injected new energy into Joaquim, who was slowly regaining his health and smile. But the serenity would be short-lived. Fate, or rather ambition, had its own ways of tracking money. An expensive, imposing black Mercedes-Benz, which seemed completely out of place on the humble, colorful Valley Street, pulled up abruptly in front of Marcos and Ana's house. The engine fell silent, but the air was heavy, filled with ill intent. Sandra, Roberto, and Bruno emerged from the car. They were impeccably dressed, wearing designer clothes, shiny shoes, and sunglasses that hid their eyes, but not the greed in their movements. The change in their demeanor, from ungrateful children to predators, was evident. They had tracked down the parents through the law firm in Guadalajara, news of the inheritance spreading like wildfire. Now it was no longer the children who were ridding themselves of a burden. They were hunters in search of valuable prey. The theater of sadness had been replaced by the cynicism of greed. Sandra was the first to smile, a forced, fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. She waved at the door, her expression one of false joy, as if she were visiting loved ones. She would try to rewrite history with the ink of lies. They approached the door, the shadows of their tall bodies falling across Ana and Marcos's modest balcony, contaminating the peaceful atmosphere. They had come to reclaim what, in their minds, was Cortez family property. Vera watched the scene from the window, the cold anger in her chest turning to steel. She saw the hypocrisy in every move, the audacity of betrayal. She no longer felt the pain of rejection, only the strength of indignation and the determination to protect what was Joaquim's. Joaquim, sitting on the sofa, grabbed Vera's hand. His eyes were no longer lost. They were filled with fire, the illness temporarily forgotten by the force of his fury. He was ready for the final confrontation, for the judgment of the ungrateful. The doorbell rang, a shrill, menacing sound. It wasn't the knock of an expected visitor, but rather the sound that announced the entry of evil into the house. The bell rang like a funeral bell, a toll that announced the death of the last chance for reconciliation and the return of the shadows of the past. Anna, unaware of the extent of the betrayal, opened the door with her natural hospitality, but soon retreated before the cutting coldness of the Cortez children. Sandra advanced first, ignoring the hostess, and went towards Joaquim with a forced hug. Anna and Marcos's modest living room became the stage for an epic confrontation. "Dad, Mom, thank God you're okay. We were so worried," Sandra began to act out, but Vera interrupted her with a low, controlled voice, more dangerous than a scream. "Worried? Where was that worry when they left us for dead on the road and lied about the letters?" Sandra's fake smile faltered. Roberto tried to intervene, using his lawyerly tone, talking about misunderstandings and miscommunication regarding the inheritance documents. He tried to smooth things over, but his greed betrayed him. "We're just here to ensure that Grandpa's inheritance is managed properly, as is family tradition. We need to discuss the division of the family money," Roberto demanded, looking at his father with authority, as if he were still in control of the situation. Anna, sensing the cruelty, stepped forward, placing herself beside Vera, a lioness defending her pack. "They're in my house and they're my family now," she declared firmly, looking at the three brothers with contempt. "Their money isn't your problem, nor is their management." Bruno, the weakest, showed a flicker of shame on his face, but it was quickly erased by the pressure from his brothers. They insisted on their blood right, claiming the money had been denied them for years. The argument quickly escalated from pleas to demands. Joaquim, with a strength Vera hadn't seen in years, slowly stood up. He looked at his children one by one, and the pain on his face gave way to righteous fury. He was stronger, but also more hurt than ever. His voice boomed in the room, thunderous and undeniable. "Children don't abandon their parents on the road. Children don't steal dignity and peace. You condemned us, and now you come asking for what you never deserved, our forgiveness and our money." Joaquim's fury was the final judgment. Vera approached the door, opening it with a broad, peremptory gesture. Her gaze swept across the three of them. "We gave you life, a home, and everything we had. You abandoned us," she said, her voice full of authority. "Leave this house now, which belongs to good people, and never come looking for us again. You are dead to us, and to the inheritance." The confrontation had ended with the expulsion. 2 weeks later, Vera and Joaquim, accompanied by Anna and Marcos, were in Dr. Pereira's office in downtown L.A. The lawyer, a serious man moved by the story, was ready to draft Joaquim Cortez's new and final will. The cold marble of the office did not reflect the warm clarity of the decision that would be made there. Joaquim, healthier and more determined, dictated his terms with surprising lucidity. He wanted the entire fortune, the properties in Jalisco and the capital, to be used for a single purpose: to repair the damage he and Vera had suffered and to help others in the same situation. The first part of the will was clear. Ana Gutierrez and Marcos Ramirez would be the sole heirs to a substantial trust to ensure their financial security. To them, Joaquim left a legacy of gratitude, calling them the children God sent to rescue us. The second and largest portion of the inheritance would be used to create a foundation to assist and shelter abandoned elderly people, Casa Cortez. The goal was to provide a real home, full of love and dignity, the opposite of the nursing home where they had been evicted. The lawyer typed in silence, impressed by the couple's resolute kindness. Vera watched Joaquim, feeling a surge of pride in his moral strength. They had lost children, but they had gained purpose. When Dr. Pereira finished typing, he reviewed the document seriously and looked up. He knew there was an important clause missing, and he had to ask, both out of professional duty and human curiosity. "Dona Vera, Mr. Joaquim," he asked hesitantly. "What about your biological children, Sandra, Roberto, and Bruno? What does the will reserve for them?" He watched the couple, waiting for a moment of hesitation, of pain, of a last chance. Vera and Joaquim looked at each other, and there was no pain in their eyes, only a resolute and final calm. They had already cried. Now was the time for justice, not emotion. The decision was a reflection of what they had been through. Vera spoke, her voice firm and clear, sealing the fate of her ungrateful offspring with a few devastating words. "I leave my biological children what they gave us when we needed it most, Dr. Pereira. Nothing. The will must be clear. Ingratitude is not inherited. It is punished." In less than a year, Marcos and Ana's honest and foresighted stewardship of the Jalisco inheritance began to bear fruit. They purchased a large property in a quiet area of Los Angeles and, overseen by Vera, transformed it into a haven. The disinfectant smell of the nursing home was replaced by the scent of wet earth and freshly planted flowers. Casa Cortez was born, a shelter for elderly people who, like Vera and Joaquim, had been abandoned. There were no strict rules, no locked doors, just comfortable beds, home-cooked meals, and above all, unconditional respect and affection. Vera became the soul of Casa Cortez. She oversaw the kitchen, planted flowers in the garden, and listened to the life stories of the other residents, offering them the empathy her own children had denied her. Joaquim, reinvigorated by his newfound purpose, was the silent guardian, his laughter slowly returning. The garden, once a dry, lifeless lawn, flourished under Marcos's care, bursting with roses, malvones, and carnations, reminding Vera of her father's home in Mexico. The place brimmed with laughter, card games, and peace. Marcos and Ana, now wealthy but with their souls intact, were the pillars of the foundation. They dedicated themselves day and night, the love they felt for Vera and Joaquim extending to all the residents. They proved that true kinship is forged by deeds, not blood. Vera felt like a mother again, not just to one, but to a dozen rescued souls. She taught recipes, told stories, and for the first time in years, felt her life had value, that suffering had given way to a greater purpose. One sunny afternoon, as Vera helped pick tomatoes in the garden, a small figure with dark hair and bright eyes ran toward her, stumbling in the grass. It was Helena, Marcos and Ana's 4-year-old daughter. The girl hugged her with the strength of innocence and, raising her eyes to Vera, asked the question that tore through the matriarch's heart. There was no rehearsal, only the truth of childhood in her voice. Little Helena hugged her tightly, looking up with dark eyes, and called out as naturally as possible, "Grandma Vera, Grandpa Joaquim is waiting to read me a story." Vera burst into tears of pure happiness, the title of Grandma regained this time through love. News of the foundation and the inheritance soon reached Sandra, Roberto, and Bruno, unleashing a fury of greed. The dream of an easy inheritance was shattered, and hatred for Casa Cortez became their sole focus. They would not accept defeat and prepared a pathetic but destructive counterattack. Sandra sent a long, tearful letter, handwritten on expensive paper, full of false apologies and emotional manipulation. She spoke of the eternal love of a daughter, the great mistake of her youth, and the desire to make amends for the past. The tone was theatrical, but the intention was clear. Reconciliation was just a gateway to money. Roberto tried a legal approach, sending a lawyer to Casa Cortez. The lawyer, a man in a dull pinstriped suit, threatened legal action to challenge the will, claiming Joaquim was mentally incapacitated at the time of signing. Bruno, the most impulsive and violent, attempted direct contact by phone. He left threatening messages on Marcos's answering machine, mixing pleas for money with veiled threats of public exposure and defamation. He tried to drag the Ramirez family into the mire of his own ingratitude. Vera, however, was prepared. Her pain had become a shield. The love of Ana, Marcos, and the rescued elderly was her new armor. She was no longer the frail, frightened old woman from the nursing home. She was the protector of a legacy of kindness. She took Sandra's letter, not even opening it completely, smelling the perfume and falsehood. She showed it to Joaquim, who simply nodded in silent and definitive disapproval. They wouldn't be fooled again. Vera walked over to the trash can in the Casa Cortez office, a simple metal one. The act wasn't one of anger, but of finality. She was wiping away the last crumbs of a toxic past. The sound of crumpled paper being thrown into the trash can was the sound of peace being restored. Vera looked at Marcos, who watched her with respect and admiration. "It's the same thing they did to us, Marcos," she declared in a strong voice. "They threw us away. Now we throw away their lie. It's over." 3 years passed. Casa Cortez was a beacon of hope in the Los Angeles community, a living testament to the victory of kindness over greed. Vera's garden was lush, and Helena's laughter filled the hallways. Life was full, but time, unfortunately, had its own plans. Joaquim, though surrounded by love and care, was increasingly weakened. The disease progressed silently, and his physical strength diminished with each passing day. Yet he was at peace. Dying there, at Casa Cortez, was the redemption of his life, the exact opposite of dying in the solitude of the nursing home. One spring dawn, the scent of fresh rain hung in the air. Joaquim woke Vera and called her with a faint whisper. He was in her arms, snuggled, his breathing slow and shallow. He smiled, a smile full of love and gratitude, and closed his eyes. Vera held him for a long time, feeling the warmth of his body slowly dissipate. The pain was profound, the loss of a lifelong companion, but the sadness was serene. They had finished their journey together in freedom and honor, and that was all that mattered. Vera's mourning was shared by the entire Casa Cortez, the foundation that was the last testament to Joaquim's love. The funeral was simple, but filled with people who loved him, the elderly he rescued, and the family he chose. Days later, Dr. Pereira visited Casa Cortez for the final act. He handed Vera Joaquim's final will, a document he had signed 3 months earlier in a moment of perfect lucidity, ratifying every previous clause. Vera opened the document, the ink fresh under her fingers. The donation clauses for Ana, Marcos, and the foundation were there, unchanged. But one final clause had been added, handwritten by Joaquim and notarized. His eyes darted to the final section of the document. A final message, a final, powerful act of justice. The sentence was short, but its intent was eternal. Vera saw Joaquim's firm, shaky handwriting at the bottom of the document and read it aloud. The final will left only 1 symbolic peso to each ungrateful son, accompanied by his final sentence. The final will, with its brutal clarity, was a masterpiece of Joaquim Cortez's dignity. The donation of his entire estate to the Ramirez family and the Casa Cortez Foundation was complete, unassailable. But the will would not be complete without the clause that would seal the moral fate of his ungrateful children. Dr. Pereira read aloud Joaquim's last disposition. To my biological children, Sandra, Roberto, and Bruno Cortez, I leave the symbolic amount of 1 Mexican peso for each one. The silence in the room was total, broken only by the lawyer's voice, who hesitated before reading the final sentence. The lawyer cleared his throat and read the conclusion, handwritten by Joaquim, a sentence that was heavier than any fortune. To the children who abandoned us, I leave the same thing they gave us when we needed it most. Nothing. Joaquim's justice was not revenge. It was the reestablishment of moral truth. The news soon spread, and the fury of the ungrateful children was monumental. They attempted to legally contest it, but Joaquim's will was solid. The final ruling became a legend in the legal community of Los Angeles and Mexico, the legacy of ingratitude. Sandra, Roberto, and Bruno Cortez had to live with public humiliation and financial loss, punished not only by legal justice, but also by the moral condemnation of their own parents. They didn't have the money, but they had to deal with the weight of the Cortez name, now synonymous with abandonment. Vera continued her work at Casa Cortez, stronger than ever. Her grief over the loss of Joaquim was eased by the constant presence of Ana, Marcos, and little Helena, who had become her ray of sunshine. She found the family she had been denied. At sunset, Vera sat on the porch of Casa Cortez, her hand in Ana's, Marcos's smile nearby. Helena hugged her waist, calling her grandma. She saw the rescued elderly people laughing in the garden and felt peace. The sunset painted the Los Angeles sky in shades of orange and purple, the perfect backdrop for a conclusion. Vera understood that love isn't inherited. It's chosen and cultivated with sacrifice and presence. Family isn't blood. It's chosen love. The story of Vera and Joaquim Cortez, the history of the inheritance of love, teaches us that no matter how deep the betrayal, dignity is the only fortune that cannot be stolen. Your family can be found in hearts that choose to love you, not in those forced by biology. If you were moved by Vera and Joaquim's journey, if you believe in justice and the strength of true love, leave your like and subscribe to the channel to follow more stories that remind us that life is made of choices, and the most important one is to always love honestly. Remember, your dignity is worth more than any inheritance.